Welcome, everyone, to a journey of discovery and connection in this Finding Your Roots national conversation from dead ends to discoveries, overcoming roadblocks in genealogy research. Today, we're here to transform the challenges and frustrations of tracing our family roots into opportunities for breakthroughs and newfound connections. My name is Tania Kuntz, and I have been an enthusiastic genealogy researcher for close to 20 years, leveraging my professional career in information science and knowledge management. I volunteer extensively in the genealogy community and currently serve as a board member with the Afro-American Historical and Genealogical Society, or OGS as we refer to it. OGS is a national organization dedicated to preserving the rich family history and genealogy of African ancestred individuals, families, and their communities. Additionally, through the Academy of Legacy Leaders initiative that I run, I help foster genealogy, inspiration, education, and camaraderie. I am so very honored to serve as the moderator today and guide us through what promises to be an enlightening conversation and discussion that can help us unlock the doors to the past. I eagerly look forward to engaging with our panelists and hearing from you in the chat as well as we share a wealth of knowledge, insights, and strategies. Today's conversation topic is a celebration of our shared passion for uncovering the stories of our ancestors, a task that often presents as many challenges as it does rewards. The path of genealogy is a deeply personal one, marked by family mystery, moments of exhilaration when we uncover long-lost relatives, or piece together those puzzle pieces that we all seek to solve. Yet, it's also a journey that can lead us to seemingly insurmountable roadblocks, where records end and trails go cold. It is here in these moments of uncertainty that our quest for knowledge is truly tested. Our panel features 3 distinguished experts, each bringing unique insights and experiences to our discussion on genealogy. Together, these panelists offer a wealth of knowledge and expertise in genealogy, from historical research to the latest in DNA technologies and how to best use them. And they're ready to share their insights and discoveries with our audience today. Let me begin by introducing you to Lisa Fanning. Lisa is a lifelong genealogist with close to 30 years of experience delving into her family's American history, which dates back to the 1600s. Lisa has a focus on the exploration of enslavement, migration, and triracial isolate communities. A genetic genealogist, she also volunteers for notable organizations like the DNA Doe Project and Search Squad. Lisa volunteers for the Tulsa Race Massacre DNA Identification Project and serves on the boards of the National Genealogical Society and the Society of the First African Families of English America. Lisa also coordinates the DNA track for the Midwest African American Genealogy Institute. Lisa is an award-winning artist with degrees in French and intercultural communication, and recently contributed as a genealogy consultant to the Before the Bulldozers Historic Southwest DC Exposed project. We have with us today Cece Moore, who is the lead genetic genealogist for Finding Your Roots and has been with the show for over a decade. She is highly recognized as a groundbreaking pioneer in solving unknown parentage mysteries, family puzzles, as well as successfully identifying hundreds of violent offenders in criminal cases, all using strategies with autosomal DNA. She is well known as the face of genetic genealogy, and her innovative and outstanding work receives frequent and widespread media attention, that highlight her valuable and significant contributions to the field. Cece is the chief genetic genealogist for Parabon Nanolabs, and her research acumen has been followed in the show The Genetic Detective. Dr. Henry Louis Gates Jr. himself has described Cece as, and I quote, a detective with skills that would put Sherlock Holmes to shame. Our third panelist is Nick Sheedy. Nick brings more than 30 years of genealogical research experience and has a versatile background that includes family histories, research of enslaved persons, unknown parentage, and medical genetic studies. Specializing in African American, slave era, early American, colonial, and Quaker genealogy, Nick has contributed extensively to Finding Your Roots, where he currently serves as lead genealogist. His work with a team of genealogists and historians underscores his commitment to uncovering the past and connecting people with their family roots. Through his investigations, as he explores the intricate past of the show's featured guests, Nick has experience with research in a multitude of libraries, archives, courthouses, and special collections across the United States and Canada. This is a dynamic group that will certainly inspire us, educate us, and help us with bridging the gap between the past and the present and navigating through what is uncovered. Today's conversation will begin with some commonly asked questions that may arise when tracing unknown parentage, and we'll conclude with questions submitted in advance by our viewers. Welcome to all of our panelists. I'd like to begin with a question for you, Cece. As a core and longstanding member of the Finding Your Roots production team, you've uncovered some very interesting stories over the years. Could you provide a story of how genetic genealogy has helped unlock the family mystery of a guest on the show?
Well, we have had so many, and as time goes on, we've made incredible DNA discoveries more often due to the huge databases that we now have at the direct-to-consumer DNA testing companies. So one of the very first was the LL Cool J story, where I discovered through DNA initially that his mother was adopted and didn't know it. And he was very, very close to his grandfather and grandmother. In fact, he lived with them growing up. So it was a huge discovery for them. Shockingly, I was able to find his mother's birth mother still alive. And they were able to spend years getting to know each other, which was incredibly fulfilling. And that opened up a lot of exploration into those family lines. And then more recently, we had Joe Manganiello, who really had one of the most incredible genetic genealogy stories I've ever seen in my life. And his father ended up having a misattributed paternity. And once we broke through that brick wall, it opened up one of the richest family histories I have ever seen. So hopefully everyone watching this has seen that episode, because it really is just incredible, something that would take me this entire time to just try to describe.
Yes, those episodes are certainly remarkable and made an impression upon myself when I saw them, as well as I know others in the community who were just really impressed at what you were able to discover and to see those lineages opening up for those guests. So, very much a valuable discovery that you were able to help make put in place. So thank you for sharing the stories.
Yeah, I wanted to give a shout out to Kimberly Morgan as well, because ever since she's joined the show, we've been able to do a lot more DNA work, because for the first few years, it was just me. And there was only so much I could do. So since she's joined, I think it's really helped to make the DNA discoveries even richer.
All right. And so it's both you and Kimberly at this point who work on the genetic genealogy.
It is. Now she's also a lead genealogist, so she has a lot of other responsibilities as well. So it's still really in my lap, but I can't tell you how many times she's just swooped in and been the hero and helped to lighten that load and also make incredible discoveries for our guests.
That's wonderful. Thank you. And that leads to the next question that I wanted to ask, because one thing that is exciting about the show is learning about the extensive research that y'all are able to do on the Finding Your Roots team. However, not everyone has access to the same level of expert support in order to help them solve their own family mysteries. So, Lisa, with your genealogy research experience, combined with your role as a board member of the National Genealogical Society, This provides you with ample opportunity and exposure to resources and the overall research process. So, for individuals who are new to genealogy trying to trace unknown parentage, where should they start? What are some resources that are available to assist them in trying to track down unknown parentage using DNA?
Yeah, the first step is to recognize that they're joining a global community of genealogists who are passionate about family history, solving family mysteries, and gaining deeper insight into their identity. The National Genealogical Society, among many other organizations, is part of this community and offers valuable resources to support their journey. And fortunately, both within and outside the genealogy community, innovators like Cece have revolutionized the process, making it easier than ever for individuals to discover their biological family members through advancements like genealogical DNA testing companies, online tools, databases, digitized records. The landscape has drastically changed from when I began in the mid-90s, spending weekends researching at the National Archives. So there are several pathways individuals can explore to help them identify their birth parents. I will talk about a couple of them, but I want to start off by saying that I believe everyone has a right to know who their birth parents are, but not all birth parents want to be found or are interested in having a relationship with their biological children if they are found. However, there are reasons beyond having a relationship with a birth parent that can make it important to identify birth parents, such as a genetic medical condition. So when people embark on this journey, they just have to be aware that there may be unexpected outcomes. But fortunately, there are many groups, especially on social media platforms like Facebook, with safe spaces for adoptees or individuals with unknown parents who encounter these situations. And I'll mention a few of those in a minute. One of the best ways, I think, to identify unknown parents is through taking a genealogical DNA test with a company that offers what's called autosomal DNA testing. This specific test looks at the segments of DNA a person shares with everyone to whom they're related through both their maternal and paternal family lines. Some companies that offer these types of this type of testing are Ancestry.com, MyHeritage, 23andMe, and FTDNA. Even if a person's biological parents have not taken a DNA test, a close relative of theirs may have, and they'll show up in their DNA database as a relative. That's because millions and millions and millions of people worldwide have now taken this type of DNA test. I also recommend that individuals looking for birth parents submit their DNA to multiple testing companies. Although it can be a little costly, it will expand the pool of their DNA relatives and enhance the chances of identifying their birth families and parents. Some companies also offer the option to transfer their DNA to these companies for a small fee so that they can access the DNA relatives that they may have in their database. After taking the DNA test, you can hire a genetic genealogist to assist you with your search. Many organizations and companies keep a list of professional genetic genealogists on their websites or in their databases. Or another very popular way is to join one of several online groups and organizations dedicated to assisting individuals who want to connect with their birth families, often at little to no cost. Many of these groups are on Facebook. They work with volunteers who are willing to help with their search case. Some are called search angels like me. And they help searchers navigate the entire process from submitting their search inquiry and using genetic genealogy to identify birth families to developing a contact plan once a parent has been found. Search angels can also work with searchers who do not wish to submit DNA for their search. I'll mention a couple of these groups. One is called Search Squad. Cece and I both have a connection to this group. And in addition to helping with their search, they ensure that you get emotional support, that the emotional support you might need throughout the process. Another group with similar search assistance is DNA Angels. Many groups work with search angels operating across the country and the world. So CC has also founded another group called DNA Detectives.
Right. So Lisa, you provided a very good overview of some of these resources that are available. So CC, tell us a little bit more about DNA Detectives.
DNA Detectives was the first Facebook group that was intended to help people learn how to use their own DNA to solve their family mysteries, especially adoption, unknown parentage, misattributed paternity. And it really spun off from Search Squad. So I had been running some mailing lists on Yahoo and RootsWeb, and then I joined Search Squad, and we found that there was really a need for DNA expertise. And nowadays, Search Squad has that, but at that time, they didn't. And so I was encouraged to start DNA Detectives, which was my company name, and it fit for the Facebook group. And we started helping people find their birth parents and birth grandparents through their own DNA. And this was early days. Now that sounds like, well, of course, right? But at the time, it was still really novel. And it was created for two reasons. One was to assist people who wanted to do their own research, who wanted to use their own DNA to solve their own identity mysteries, and to bring people who wanted to help, search angels or DNA detectives, who wanted to assist people who were looking for help as a search angel. So it was really a mixture of an educational resource and a meeting place. And we were so fortunate that so many kind genetic genealogists, search angels gathered there and offered their services for free. Now, since that time, which was early 2015, we have helped hundreds of thousands of individuals. We have over 200,000 right now, but there are hundreds of thousands who have cycled through. They've come in, they have solved their own mysteries, and they've moved on. If I look at some of our old threads, a lot of people aren't in the group anymore, but we were also lucky that a lot of those people decided to stay and pay it forward and learn how to help others or just encourage them on. And it's just a really great place to see a lot of heartwarming stories of people who have been successful using DNA to enhance their knowledge of their genetic history. So as Lisa said, it doesn't always end in a family reunion or a family meeting. It does the majority of the time in our group, I will say. So that is wonderful to see. But it's not always a happy beginning like that. But it is still so valuable for people to have access to the knowledge of their genetic history for the reasons that Lisa said, and just having access to be able to research their own genealogy. When I first became a genealogist, I didn't know that there was this whole group of people who didn't have access to their own family tree, their own genetic family tree. And as Lisa said, I felt strongly that everyone has that right. So even if you don't have the right to have a relationship with your biological family, you do have the right to that knowledge. And everyone should have equal access to exploring their genetic family tree. So it's just been thrilling to see what that group has turned into. I have had amazing admins running that group, sometimes full time. People are spending, volunteering their time to run that group. And so I'm not there as much as I used to be, but it's still wonderful to pop in and see all the good that's being done. And that's thanks to my admins and all the volunteers who are willing to help. And one thing, we don't allow anyone to charge in the group. This is all done pro bono, free. And it's been a great starting place for a lot of people who wanted to make a career in genetic genealogy too, and have gotten their feet wet in there and gotten to have access to a lot of different types of cases and population groups. Because one of my greatest pieces of advice of people who want to do this professionally is you need to be able to practice in different population groups. And so it's great to start with yourself and your friends, but then you have to move beyond that and you have to get that depth of knowledge and experience. And it's really the best way I can think of is to volunteer to help people. You know, you shouldn't be learning on someone else's dime. So it's a really good place to get that experience you need. A lot of people have used it as a jumping off place to become professional genetic genealogists, and then more recently to become professional investigative genetic genealogists, since the techniques that we developed there and that are taught there and used there are exactly the same ones that are used in law enforcement work. So they really have created a foundation for a lot of people who have wanted to learn how to do that, particularly when there was very little to no educational resources to do that. So I'm extremely proud of my DNA detectives group and all the people that have made it what it is.
That's fantastic. And, I appreciate you sharing as well that pathway towards becoming professionally able to help others solve their challenges, because we have viewers of all, experience levels, from beginners to those that are professionals. So we very much appreciate you sharing those tips as well. And to our viewers who are watching online, if you have questions about additional resources to which you can connect, we welcome you to ask about it in the chat. Or if you're watching and you have suggestions for additional resources, share those too, right? There are many groups that aid us in these research challenges, and your input is helpful as well, since we're not able to cover them all in the time we have today. And, I'll just add briefly, as I'm a board member with the Afro-American Historical and Genealogical Society, if you're researching your African ancestor roots, we invite you to look up and see if there's a chapter in your area, or become, a national member, because through our chapters, we provide workshops, educational sessions, special interest group, all designed to help and aid you in that process. Now, I want to turn to Nick, because Nick, I really think your work is extremely fascinating too, because as viewers of Finding Your Roots, we see the end result of the research that gets done on the guest's background, but it's a condensed version of that process. So with your extensive research experience and the role that you have as lead genealogist, you have a unique behind the scenes perspective. So what I'd like to ask you is, can you walk us through what that research process is like? And, I know it's difficult to say how long it is, but we know it's longer than what we see on this show. But let's walk a little bit in your shoes. Tell us more about the research that you engage in to tackle these challenges.
Well, sure. And, the first thing, we send out a questionnaire, we get it back, and then we start documenting the people like anybody would do with their own family tree. Any professional genealogist, you do a census survey. You gather every vital record you can find for the people, World War I, World War II draft cards. Once you get back to the immigrant generation, for immigrants, you often have to profile the entire family group. You try to find them on an arrival record, a ship manifest, naturalization records, anything that will indicate an exact birth date and place to help you place them in the old country. And then at that point, if we have access to records online or even indexes, we might do some preliminary research. But for the most part, for the foreign research, we'll often pass that off to a specialist in one of those areas, especially Jewish research in Eastern Europe. A lot of Hispanic research we'll pass off to somebody with Latin American expertise. And sometimes we have go-to people. And other times, it'll be a place that we haven't had a lot of experience, and we'll have to network and find somebody to help us in country. Oftentimes that person's a scholar that will help us network and find people to look for records for us and put the pieces together. And if there's a language barrier, especially, then we need to hire somebody with expertise in that area. But we never know what we're going to find. And then at some point, we've mapped out the family tree. We've identified who these people were, where they were. We've gathered some records for them. And then our production team looks that over. We start doing deeper dives, newspaper sweeps, looking for maybe non-genealogical records that put a little meat on the bones and tell you some biographical information, military records, things that might help tell a story. And so, there's a process to that. But hundreds of hours typically, and sometimes many hundreds of hours will go into a guest collectively when you look at the whole team, and especially if we hire specialists or foreign researchers. But the process is unique for every single guest. And I think that's the very unique thing about finding your roots, is that we do intense primary research for every single guest on every single episode. And that every single person's pedigree is totally unique. Occasionally we find that, you know, guests are related somehow, and sometimes through the paper trail we know, you know, there's certain ancestors that guests have in common. But for the most part, they are all brand new people, and you have to just approach it like you would your own family tree or anybody's family tree. You start with what you know, you go looking for the records, where these people lived, when they lived, and you're limited by what records were kept,
Yes.
what records survive,
Yes.
and how accessible are they.
Thank you, Nick, for taking us through that journey. It's a strategy that I think many will appreciate as they try to figure out how to best navigate their research paths as well. So, Cece, let's talk a little bit more about genetic genealogy. So, analyzing DNA can be challenging, and many people do feel it's a roadblock. What advice would you give to someone who wants to be better at analyzing their DNA but feel intimidated by the process?
Well, first of all, you just have to dive into your own DNA, your family's DNA, if they're willing to test for you. Try out the different tools. For instance, if you tested Ancestry DNA, they have some great tools now. And so anyone who's just starting out now is in a much better position than those of us who started out 10 years ago or more. When we started, there were no educational resources and there were very few tools. It's a completely different landscape now. And so there are lots of educational opportunities, and many of them are free. Just searching for webinars or videos on YouTube, for instance, there is a real richness of information that's available now. So anybody who really wants to learn absolutely has the ability to do so. There's also some wonderful Facebook groups in addition to my own DNA detectives. There's Blaine Bettinger's group, which is Genetic Genealogy Tips and Techniques. And what we've always been about in this community is sharing and learning from each other. And so I would really encourage anyone who's interested in learning more about genetic genealogy to engage with the community. Join some of these Facebook groups. If you are able to go to in-person classes, there are some wonderful institute courses that are offered that teach about genetic genealogy. Blaine Bettinger, Debbie Parker Wayne, and I developed the very first genetic genealogy course for one of those institutes way back in 2014. And now there's just a plethora of offerings. And it's so exciting to see how many different avenues there are to learn now. There's books you can order. And so there's really no reason that somebody can't learn how to use their DNA, learn about genetic genealogy, and how to use the tools on the different sites as well.
Right. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And so here's a question for the whole panel. What tools do you find helpful for organizing the information that you gather with your DNA discoveries and your findings? What tools could you share?
Well, I'll start. I like to use Scalpel, which is a mind mapping tool that I learned about from Cece, of course. I'm a visual person and a horrible note taker. So Scalpel allows me to see how the data that I'm collecting are related to each other. I can put hyperlinks in there, photos, documents, notes, without worrying about the organization while I'm gathering the data during research. And then I can go back and organize it. So I find that to be a very helpful tool for me when I'm doing research.
Yeah, I highly recommend getting some genealogy software, family tree software, and there's lots of options out there. There's some online options, there's some standalone options where you put it on, a desktop or a laptop computer, and it just allows you to organize the family tree and map it out. And that's especially true if your family tree is going to extend out to distant cousins, not just ancestors. And so if you're mapping out aunts and uncles and different cousins and collateral lines, that family tree software will really help you stay organized that way. There's some that will interface with an online platform as well. but I think that's a good place to stay organized. And there's places there to cite your sources, add notes, color code people. And so I find Roots Magic or Family Tree Maker, programs like that, to be extremely helpful to keep your family tree organized. And then you can download a GEDCOM and upload it to various sites on the internet that house family trees, platforms, and you'd be sharing your information with other people.
Yes, indeed. Cece, any other tips or tools that you use in your work that you could share?
Lisa definitely shared one of my most favorite, Scaffold, but it sounds like she does more with it than I do. I'm actually not great about tools because when I started this, there weren't any. And so my process is really doing a lot of things manually. But I will give a shout out to ancestry.com. I really think they have developed wonderful tools, both for their family tree building and their DNA site. It's just a new world, right? It's nothing like it used to be. We can find so much so quickly, and it's such an exciting time to be in genealogy and genetic genealogy.
Yes, definitely it is. And each of you have discussed your different tools and strategies, and it just speaks to the variety of methods that we all use as we go in our work. And you've all touched on the importance of visualizing what you're uncovering, because through that visualization process, you may see some gaps and it may give you clues. So thank you for taking us through that. And, you know, if you're viewing the discussion and you're in the chat, we encourage you to share your suggestions too, because it may be inspiring to others. So let me go to Lisa and ask this question. What are some current initiatives that help people track down biological parents using DNA?
Yeah, so I'm aware of MyHeritage. They have a really great pro bono initiative called MyHeritage DNA Quest, where the company provides, I think, 5,000 free DNA kits for adoptees seeking info to find their biological family members, and also to parents and other family members looking for a child placed for adoption years ago. Preference is really given to individuals who have limited financial resources, which is great. The application is currently closed. They've had this initiative, I think, since 2018. But there's a waiting list to receive information about any future application periods. Also, Search Squad, again, they have an initiative called Pay It Forward. And that provides DNA kits also to searchers with limited financial resources. They accept donations, and that money goes towards the purchase of DNA kits. So those are a couple of initiatives that I'm aware of.
Great. Thank you. And, you know, sharing those resources is helpful, especially for those that are adopted and seeking their birth family. So we appreciate you sharing that. Nick, let me ask you this. In your work of tracing unknown parentage, you've touched on this because sometimes we need to think outside the box. So when it comes to records that we examine, what are a few tips you can offer to help us do that? Like, what type of records could we explore that may not be so common that we should really keep in mind when tackling a particularly challenging puzzle?
Well, you know, with unknown parentage, I've had a little experience with that as a professional, and I've also had some experience with that as an amateur, you know, with my own family tree. Because I've asked so many of my cousins and relatives to test. But the problem with looking outside the box and looking for records when you're talking about a misattributed paternity is usually you're not going to find a record that proves that relationship. It's purely a DNA mystery. You know, a lot of the DNA mysteries that we solve on Finding Your Roots, and Cece, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but you know, the paper trail would never even suggest or indicate that relationship otherwise. You know, hopefully the paper trail corroborates it and puts the people in the same place at the right time. You know, you have to have proximity. You know, as far as obscure records that might help put the pieces together, that's you know, that's not something I'm actually terribly familiar with. Except in, say, adoption cases where there may actually be an adoption record. And then it's simply a matter of, are those adoption records publicly accessible? Can you petition to have them opened up? Sometimes in states where those adoption records are closed, you can have an intermediary actually look at those records, and they can't divulge to you the identity of the birth parents, but they can actually reach out especially if there's a database or that and Cece, you're more familiar with this than I am, but especially if there's a database and people have opted into being contacted, then this intermediary can reach out and have a conversation with both parties. And if they are agreeable, then they can reunite them, or at least put them in touch. And so that really depends on which state and what the rules and regulations are, whether or not that's an option. But so often when you're dealing with, say you find in the records, somebody's birth father is unknown. Well, you start looking for proximity. And in Joe Madison's case, we had an unknown paternity, not just for Joe, but it was back a few generations. And we had a candidate in mind because this white man is always living right next door to a Black woman and her mulatto children. And, there's close proximity there. And on I believe one of the death certificates, one of the children identified that man as the father. And so in a situation like that, which is a little unusual if you have a misattributed paternity or an unknown paternity, here we have a man and a woman who obviously had a long relationship and multiple children together. You end up profiling a whole family group. And so you have to kind of broaden the horizon a little bit and see not only, who your ancestor is and what records can you find for that person, but do they have any siblings or half siblings? And then when you profile them and you gather all the censuses and whatnot, you look up and down the page and see who's living in close proximity. And then especially, around the time someone's conceived, you look and see who's in close proximity, or if you have, through the DNA especially, candidates in mind, you have to profile those candidates. And you do that through the paper trail research. And sometimes you can rule out certain candidates. Say you have a group of brothers and you have 3, 4, 5, sometimes 10, brothers that you're trying to figure out which one's the guy. By profiling them, you can see, well, who lives in closest proximity? And occasionally you can rule some of them out because they're nowhere near there.
Exactly.
And so that's my advice.
Very important advice. Thank you for sharing that. And, speaking of advice, right, we were so fortunate to have input of questions from our viewers ahead of this conversation. And so what I'd like to do is have you all address some of the questions that we were able to collect so people can get real, even more concrete value of how they can help overcome some of the challenges they experience. So I would like to segue and share with you some of these questions. And the first one is from Jan in Tennessee. So she asked, to get a complete DNA picture of my family tree, who within my family should get DNA tests done? Cece, would you like to maybe share some advice for Jan?
Well, obviously, first you want to test yourself because the DNA you inherited from your parents and your ancestors is going to be unique unless you are an identical twin. After you've tested yourself, or at the same time, you want to test all of your oldest living ancestors. So your parents or grandparents, who, if they are not alive, then look to see if any of their siblings are alive and willing to test. So for instance, my dad died in 2008. So I really utilized his siblings' DNA a lot in my research. Fortunately, I had my dad's Y DNA tested already. So I had his DNA in storage at Family Tree DNA. And after his death, was able to upgrade it to the autosomal DNA Family Finder test. But that's one of the smaller databases. So I utilized his siblings' DNA to learn more in Ancestry DNA and 23andMe. And so that really was so valuable. I was able to break through some brick walls and answer some long-standing questions that wouldn't have been possible if I hadn't been able to get that generation back. If you're a young person, you might be able to test your grandparents or even great-grandparents. If not, then great aunts and uncles are very valuable as well. So you want to get as close as you can to those brick walls generationally. And so if you have a really significant brick wall on one part of your family tree, you want to test as many of the descendants of the individual in question as possible. So you might want to test your first cousins, your second cousins, even third cousins. And you want to do that before it's too late. So if you're just getting started, get out there and start DNA testing. Get those kits now, get them out to the family members that are willing to test. Go through your tree as you're building it and identify those branches where you might have those brick walls and those family mysteries, and then figure out who you would need to test in order to zero in on that. So that would be your cousins, usually your second cousins, or maybe first cousins once removed, if you can get a generation higher than you. And so it really helps immensely the more people that you have tested.
Right. The more people you have tested. Very good point.
I had something to add to that. Cece mentioned targeted testing a little bit, and I'll throw one example out there in my own family research. My grandma Betty, who passed away 6 years ago now, she would have turned 101 this year. Her grandfather's father was a family mystery for a long time. This is a man born in Canada in 1852, but he happened to marry twice, and he had two family groups. And so my grandma Betty tested her autosomal DNA, but I also had her only remaining half first cousin test. So they don't share grandmothers, but they share this grandfather. And so the DNA matches that they would have in common have to be through this grandfather's parents. Well, we know the great grandmother's name, but we don't know the great grandfather's name. And because of that, I was able to narrow it down to one of 8 brothers, and then through the paper trail, narrow it down to 1 or 2 of them. But that targeted testing is really important. And also from my grandma's grandfather, Y-DNA testing was very, very important. And I tracked down a male line cousin who happens to live near me here in Montana, and he agreed to test Y-DNA. And so testing the Y-DNA gave us a list of matches that all had one surname in common. Then I can go back to my grandma Betty's and her cousin's autosomal DNA matches and punch in that surname and and filter their results using that surname to see who do they match autosomal DNA with. And that targeted search, that targeted testing and that targeted searching, helped unravel the mystery. And if we hadn't done that targeted testing, that would have been totally impossible.
Yeah, good.
That's a great concrete example, Nick. Thanks for giving that, because that really does zero in on the most important point.
Very helpful. And I want to ask another question because it ties very nicely to this point. So Lisa, Nikki in Georgia, she had a question about her matching, and she found this puzzling. She said she's obviously a DNA match to her mother, but she's noticing that she's not matching with other matches to her mother. Why is that?
Yeah, so each person receives half of their DNA from their mother and half from their father. And this means that half of each of your parents' DNA is not passed down to you, right? So although you are genealogically related to all of your mother's DNA matches, the DNA those matches share with your mother may not be part of the DNA that she didn't pass down to you. So that could be one of the reasons that she's not sharing DNA with those matches.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that explanation. Go ahead, Cece.
Sorry, that brings up an addition to what I was talking about, and I didn't say, is test your siblings. If you can't test your parents, test your siblings, because they are going to inherit different DNA than you did. So that's really important if you can't get a generation further back.
Thank you. So we also had several questions submitted by our viewers that related to contacting unknown family members that they've discovered through DNA testing. Can you elaborate on recommendations you have for people who are trying to navigate those next steps when they discover these previously unknown relatives? And this is a question for the group.
I'll chime in first there. I'm usually not cold calling too many people to break the news that they're related somehow. For finding your roots, I'll contact people and ask them to test DNA. But the one bit of advice that I would have is do not fib. Do not fib. From the start, you do not want to poison that well. If you fib and someone finds out, that will break the trust. And you really want to gain somebody's confidence, gain their trust. And if you fib even a little bit about what you're up to, why you're asking these questions, that could sour the well. And so you don't want to do that. I should say poison the well. Poison the well, sour, put a sour taste in someone's mouth. Yeah. So my advice is don't fib even a little bit. Be honest. You may or may not want to be entirely upfront and tell them everything you know all at once, because that might scare somebody off. But at the same time, be very careful and judicious about what you say so that you're not giving somebody the wrong impression about what you're up to, because you don't want to turn somebody off. And especially if this is, potentially a half sibling or an aunt or an uncle, or perhaps, your biological parent, you may want to have a relationship with these people down the road. And so you need to be very careful, because it's a little cliche, but you never get a second chance to make a first impression.
I'll add to that, Tania. I would say communicating in writing is the initial first step. Most DNA companies provide a way for you to connect with your DNA match, either by providing an email address or a way to message your DNA matches through their website. But keep in mind that you may have to use regular mail or Facebook to connect, because some people do not log into their email all the time, or view their DNA account, very often or on a regular basis. I think however you choose to connect with them, I would keep the communication warm, simple, easy to understand, explain that you have discovered that you're related, ask if they can invite you to view their tree as a guest, and then take it from there. And there's all kinds of free templates online to help you put together a letter to send to a DNA relative. If the DNA match is a parent or sibling, consider that they may not have known you existed before the DNA testing. That's possible. So try to be free of assumptions when you reach out to them. Also, before you reach out, you might want to screenshot your close matches and their trees, just in case that person decides to delete their tree or delete their kit, or make their tree private or delete their kit. And then the last thing I would say is not to get discouraged if they don't reach back out to you once you reach out to them, because sometimes it could take months for individuals to really process this new information of having you as a DNA relative, especially if it's a surprise. And so I think patience is key.
Understand. Yes. Patience is definitely key. Cece, do you have anything you'd like to add to that process of communication?
I think Lisa covered it really well. The only thing that I would add is I strongly believe that it should be the individual who is the family member that is reaching out. I know some search angels reach out, and it's just something that I've seen over the years that I feel strongly about, that it's that person's family, and they should be the ones making contact. And I know sometimes genetic genealogists or search angels get excited and they want to kind of insert themselves into that. And I just strongly recommend not doing that. I know there's different schools of thought on this and arguments, but of the thousands and thousands of cases I've seen, it really does tend to turn out better if the child, the adoptee, or the close family member is the one reaching out to their own biological family.
Makes a lot of sense because, as we noted, it's a personal experience, it's a personal connection and a personal process. So thank you.
And also, oftentimes there are similarities.
Mm.
There is immediate affinity between people that if I reach out for them, you might miss that entirely.
Yeah.
You know, if they talk to each other, meet each other, see each other, sometimes that can encourage a relationship just because there is that immediate connection for a lot of people or recognition. And so
Oh.
that's really, I think, an important part of it.
Very good point. Yes. And and that's such a good point. So let me ask you another question we got from one of our viewers. So Desiree, who's from Florida, she asked about closed or sealed adoption records that extend beyond the lifespan of the parties involved. So can you speak to a little bit to strategies that might be helpful when dealing with closed records in the case of adoption?
Well, the good news is DNA is going to work much more quickly, about 99% of the time now. Now, this wasn't true back when I started working with adoptees in 2011 and 12. We were fighting hard to get those records open, and there was still a very large percentage that couldn't. But now, because we have over 45 million people who've taken consumer DNA tests across the companies, you most of the time aren't going to need to get those records open. Now, of course, it's interesting. There might be some great information in there that you can't learn any other way, particularly if your birth parent is deceased or they decide not to have contact with you. So I'm not saying to just ignore it, but the good news is you can almost always find your biological family or certainly a lot about your genetic heritage without those records. And that is one of the reasons that many, many states have now decided to open those records and allow adoptee access, because we were really going around those records with genetic genealogy. And it, in some cases, might be better for the privacy of all parties involved if they do open those records. Because when you're doing DNA testing, of course, you're matching to relatives. Most of the time, you're not going to match to that birth parent. And so it might out a birth parent who has kept this lifelong secret. We see a lot of birth mothers who were really shamed and who never told their families about this, never told their children, their other children, and their extended family members. And so it's really a great argument for the states to strongly consider opening these adoption records and allowing access by the parties involved, right? Not the second cousins, not the other children, but that is how an adoptee can be connected directly to their birth parent if they're still living. Don't ignore the avenues to try to get your official adoption records, but know that in some states it may not be possible. And so DNA is most likely going to be your answer around that. Also, make sure you network with search angels that are specialists in that area, because sometimes we have some special tricks and tips and access to some things that might really, really help you. So again, networking is really important. Reaching out to the community is key.
Right. Thank you, Cece, for sharing those strategies with us all. Nick, let me ask you the next question from our viewer. We have Diane from Florida who shared a very common problem, and that is common surnames, right? Smith, Jones. What strategies can be helpful to work through telling your ancestor apart from other ancestors with the same common names? What advice might you give?
Well, you run into this sometimes when you wouldn't imagine that it's a common name, and all of a sudden there's three guys with the same exact name in the same county, or it's New York City, and there's four Hiram Rakowskis. And so what you end up having to do is profile multiple people with the same name. Who fits, who doesn't fit. And it's just that much more work. The other thing you need to do is profile whole family groups. And I touched on that before, but by profiling an entire family group, you get the mother, the father, all of the children. And then when you're looking for those same people in other records, you have a whole family group to try to line up. That's especially important when you jump back to ship manifests and arrival records, and then try to get back to the old country. And if you have a name where there might be multiple candidates, if you profile the entire family group, Now you just don't just have one person, but you have a whole family constellation that you're trying to match up. But say your ancestor's name and it's William Smith, and you know from his death certificate that his father's name is John and his mother's name is Mary. Now you're looking for a John and Mary Smith with a son William, and you had come up with 2 or 3 candidates. It's simply a matter of fully profiling those 2 or 3 family groups, and then which one seems to match the best. And then, if DNA comes into play, you can reach out to descendants of those groups and ask them to test DNA and see where do you match and not match. Because DNA could actually confirm relationships when the paper trail leaves it up in the air. But it's not just common surnames. I will say that it's sometimes it's names that you might not think are so common, and all of a sudden there's 4 guys with the same name in the same place.
Nick, thank you for those tips, because it is a challenge that so many researchers will face. And so I know they'll appreciate putting those tips into action. Thank you. We have covered a great deal of conversation topics, tips, insights, strategies as we've gone through our discussion on solving mysteries of unknown parentage, working with adoption records. It's been a truly inspiring conversation. And I think that's a great place for us to wrap up. Now, of course, the conversation can continue in the chat for our viewers who are watching. So we really appreciate you sharing and continuing to share your own processes, your own struggles, your own successful discoveries. But I want to take a moment to thank all of our panelists for joining us in this conversation. And before we really finalize it, do you have just a few words of inspiration to offer our viewers in working through these roadblocks?
Never give up, because new records come online, are digitized every day. I mean, it's just amazing. There are still so many records out there and resources that we don't have access to. So things can change. Also, you may get a new DNA match. Every day, there are new DNA matches coming in at the various companies and databases, and that may also solve your mystery. So just keep at it. As time passes, we'll learn more and more.
Thank you.
For me, it really is about patience sometimes, because I think research is one of those types of things we do that, when you find something, you want to find the next thing, and you want to solve the next mystery as quickly as possible so you can move on to the next thing. And it just doesn't work that way. You have to really, as Nick was saying, think outside of the box, stop and think outside of the box. You have to employ new research strategies. You have to maybe sometimes get a peer to review your work. Sometimes you just have to take a break, but just keep at it. Like Cece said, there's so much education out there now to really help you to build your knowledge base to continue on. So yeah, just soldier on and reach out to a lot of the organizations that are there to help you with your search and become part of a community. That's a really good thing.
Right. And Nick.
So one bit of advice I have is to reach out to your relatives, open some lines of communication, see who's interested in collaborating, not only to test DNA and, do some family history research, but ask about family stories that they might have heard, especially your older relatives. If you're blessed to have grandparents living, your parents, aunts, uncles, even older cousins, they may have heard stories that you didn't hear. And so you get some anecdotal information, some family stories that you might never find in records, but also you might find some little details in something they tell you that allow you to focus your research in a place that you might not have looked before. So talk to relatives, collaborate with relatives. If you throw your family tree up on Ancestry, or you test DNA and you see some DNA matches, if you reach out to people, if they posted a family tree or they tested DNA, they're likely interested in family history and they may be interested in collaborating. So do that. And, Cece and Lisa, you both had some great advice about, being patient and also be diligent about, and optimistic that a DNA match or some obscure record might come to the surface or become more easily accessible in the future. But the other thing I'm going to say, and I might be a negative Nancy to say it, but guess what? The paper trail runs out.
Yeah.
Everybody on every single line at some point. And so if you're in that situation, know that you are not alone, because in my own family tree, I have dead ends and brick walls. And yes, I hope to break them down. And sometimes it takes years and you set it down and you pick it up later. And you hope that, someday you'll figure it out. But also know that you're not alone, and that the paper trail especially runs out for everyone. And if you're looking for DNA matches, it's just a matter of who's tested. And, if that person hasn't tested yet, no amount of looking is going to find them, unless you map out a family tree that you might have a suspect in mind, a candidate, and do some targeted testing. But know that you are not alone. You're in good company if you have a solid brick wall that you're up against, because we all have one of those.
Nick,
Yeah.
you made me think of an example. I met somebody on Ancestry.com that had the shoes that my third great grandmother made for my second great grandmother.
Wow.
Yes. Isn't that amazing? Now, of course, I didn't get them, but I got pictures of them. And
Yes.
also, I've had that experience with some swords and different things that my ancestors owned, because pictures and family heirlooms, of course, get passed down different branches.
Especially family photos. Absolutely. Family
Mhm.
photos for sure. Heirlooms for sure.
Yeah.
Cece, you brought up a crazy, I want to point out a coincidence too, because I've learned, especially doing Finding Your Roots, you never say never, right? And sometimes we just can't make this stuff up. But Cece, you had a family mystery in your own family, your aunt and your cousin. And
Oh, yes.
and I'm across the street at a garage sale, and I start chatting with this guy, and we just kind of strike up a conversation about what you do and where you're from, and et cetera, et cetera. And it turns out it's Cece's long lost cousin,
Oh my goodness.
lived
Wow.
across the street from me. No, I could have thrown a rock and hit his house. So
And we were looking for him and his family for 50 something years.
Oh
and
my goodness.
Goodness.
Oh my, wow.
When I told him what I did for work, I'm a genealogist. He says, well, I have a crazy story to tell you. You've probably seen this woman. She's a gorgeous blonde. She's on TV, and her name's Cece Moore. And I'm like, I work with
Oh,
Cece.
you work with her.
She's my colleague. So
Oh, wow.
you can't make this stuff up. And there truly is, there's 6 degrees of separation,
Definitely. And, and it goes to show the power of community, the power of putting yourself out there, doing that work and pursuing and keeping at it. So I want to thank all of you for sharing everything that you've shared today. And, to our viewers, we really appreciate your time as well. So before we wrap up, let me just share that in this 10th season of Finding Your Roots, the team is taking a look back at the surprising discoveries and impactful stories of the series. So if you want to know more about how the show made it through these 10 glorious seasons, now's the time. There is the Ask a Genealogist digital series, which features the show's expert genealogists, some of whom you've heard from today, who are answering the questions that you want to know. So there's a post-event survey where you can share your questions, and you know what? You just may see it answered on social media soon. Don't forget to tune in to see the remaining episodes of season 10 of Finding Your Roots, airing on PBS on April 2nd and 9th. Thank you all for joining us, and have a wonderful evening.